Welcome to the Luke Macias Show. Last week, we gave you an overview of the good of the legislative session, and today we will talk about the bad. Let's get to the show. We are doing a 3-week series, the good, the bad, and the ugly of the legislative session as we overview the results. Last week, I had the good. This is something that some of you really appreciated and some of you pushed back on. There are just a group of conservatives that do want to very much focus on all the things that did not happen this session, and I appreciate and believe it is important to focus on where we fell short, because that is how you shape the plans for the future. That being said, we have to admit all of the good policy that did pass. What is the point to going out and working so hard to elect good conservative people and then actively engaging in the legislative and policy process if you're not actually going to acknowledge when conservative results are achieved? So quite a few conservative results were achieved. There were some I didn't get to. I think most of you know this, but I don't script the show out. I don't even usually have a lot of notes for the show. And so I just kind of went from various tabs and lists and things like that. And so at the end of the day, there were a number of things that I didn't mention. One of them was school choice, which I know I've had conversations on my podcast before, but I really do believe that the blow that teacher unions took, these leftist Marxist organizations who want monopolistic control over our kids, the blow they took this session with the passage of school choice was very meaningful and is a big achievement. The other achievement that I feel like I failed to mention, which is worth mentioning, is that in past sessions, the Texas House of Representatives has advanced substantial amounts of policy designed to gut the death penalty in Texas. The death penalty is strongly supported by Republicans, independents, and Democrats in this state. And the legislation that has been pushed in the past has been designed to honestly take away the death penalty for some of the most heinous criminals in our streets. So while we were passing bail reform to stop the violent criminals, the Texas House in the past has been passing policy to make it harder to enact justice when somebody has caused severe harm, murder of fellow Texans. Even people who are mass murderers are not receiving the death penalty. And them receiving the death penalty has been opposed by the Texas House of Representatives. One of the things that happened this session was that the Criminal Jurisprudence Committee was stacked with a lot of conservatives. Brent Money, Mitch Little, A.J. Louderback, Wes Friedel, David Cook was on it, John Smithy was the chair. What this ended up doing was ensuring that any and all of the Democrats' agenda to gut the death penalty did not even move. It did not progress at all in that chamber. The Senate has previously in the past killed those bills, so that is the good thing. But to actually have the House finally tap the brakes on that aspect of the Democrat agenda, the Democrat Party strongly believes in getting rid of the death penalty, was a very good thing. So those are just two other little positive notes. There's a bunch of other stuff I didn't mention, but I at least wanted to circle back on those. When it comes to the bad, now look, we're doing the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? And again, I think I said this last week. I mean, blame Clint Eastwood for me having the ugly and the good and the bad. I don't know who came up with that. I don't know if Clint did when he did the movie, but it's the good, the bad, and the ugly of the legislative session. And so today we're going to focus on the bad. Now, when trying to distinguish between the bad and the ugly, where I ultimately came down is that the ugly is going to be, to me, where I focus on just absolutely obvious wins that were right there and could have been laid up and were not addressed. So I will focus on that next week. Today, I want to talk about the bad. If I look at the session as a whole, what is one thing that kind of stands out as just, this isn't good. This is not good for where Texas is at. And my conclusion is that it largely revolves around our budget and property taxes. Our budget and property taxes. Now, I do talk about social issues and cultural issues a lot And I do think that there is some element of the time that we're in. If somebody is sexualizing a 4-year-old in a public school system, that ends up being of utmost importance to stop. And it honestly is a higher level of importance to stop than even that of eliminating a certain state agency or reducing the funding to a certain commission. So there is a hierarchy of priorities that happens. I will say this, though. It seems relatively clear that right now in Texas, we do not have either chamber focused on reining in substantial growth in state spending that we are seeing. Texans for Fiscal Responsibility has done a good job explaining to people our budget growth. You have to understand that in 2017, our state budget, the full thing, the total state and federal funds was $235 billion. Today, it is $352 billion. Our state funds, which is what we control most of, in 2021 was just over $150 billion. In 2021, our state funds portion of our budget was just over $150 billion. And today is coming right in around $250 billion, a little under $250 billion. We walked into this session with a $24 billion surplus, which means that over the last biennium, 24-25, we collected $24 billion more than what we thought we were going to bring in, which gives the legislature extra money, right? Now, what happens when you have extra money coming in is that you say, wow, see, state government still was fine. Everybody went to their jobs, infrastructure got built, things happened. So the reality is we have extra money we didn't even think we'd have. Imagine if you budgeted for the year, right? And you said, let's say you have a commission kind of based job. So you get some, you don't know exactly what you're going to make, but you and your wife sit down and you go, let's budget that we're going to make $90,000 this year. And then at the end of the year, you go, man, I didn't even realize, we had some inheritance that came in from this deal. And then I sold a really big deal that I didn't think I was going to sell. And all of a sudden, we got $115,000. We got $25,000 more than we thought we were going to have. And you know what? We've only spent $90,000 this year because that's what we planned to spend. So we literally have $25,000 in the bank account that we didn't think we were going to have. At that moment in time, you say, what are we going to do with this money? And that's what the legislature had to decide this session. The truth is, they only provided $6.5 billion to new property tax relief, meaning your current property tax bills that y'all are all paying as individuals, the amount of new relief they provided to that bill is $6.5 billion spread out over a bunch of Texans. They had $24 billion of extra money. And some conservatives said we need to give 90% of that back to the taxpayer. That is actually the only way you ultimately get rid of property taxes. Some people said, well, let's at least give more than 50% back, $12.5 billion, right? That was a compromising position. Let's just get to $12.5 billion. But unfortunately, at the end of the day, when the dust settled, they took a substantial amount of that money and spent it on more government. Not just in the state budget, but they ended up creating all of these constitutionally dedicated funds that don't count toward their full spending. It's one of the things they've done in order to make sure they don't bust through the spending cap, the spending limit, because that's kind of politically something you want to avoid. They will create all these constitutionally dedicated funds that then don't go towards their spending limit. So they're finding ways of putting more money, and they're often doing it for important things that we would all agree should be funded, like water infrastructure. All of us agree water should be funded, but it should be funded out of your base budget. It's the utility. You pay your water bill in your normal budget. It is a basic role of government. And what this spending has done, so my overarching observation is that neither side, the Senate or the House right now, and I've given the Senate a ton of credit for passing a ton of conservative legislation, and I have acknowledged a lot of these conservative bills that also passed the House last session, but I don't think anyone who looks at our budget can say that either chamber is trying to really rein in state spending and provide noticeable, meaningful property tax relief that can actually fundamentally change the life of Texans. It is the number one thing I've heard a complaint about since the end of the session. The highest frustration is property taxes. And I have talked about this on the show several times. This, to me, there is, the line that you hear, you don't want to rent your home from the government. I do understand that frustration. I don't like property taxes in general. I also think that our property tax system has become so out of control that we have begun really eating away at people's ability to achieve part of the American dream. And I believe that part of the American dream is owning a home. I think it is part of what makes us American. You own a piece of this country, a portion of dirt that you can call your own. It is the number one wealth creating vehicle for the middle class. The average middle class family does not have a substantial 401k. They don't. The average middle class family in Texas does not have a massive amount of money in the stock market. They don't have significant assets in other areas that are growing. For most of them, they have their home. And that ends up being a vehicle for wealth creation that they pass on to their children. There are many middle-class families where when that individual dies, the inheritance that their children receive is essentially the home they own. $350,000, $400,000 of an estate. 80% of it being tied up in the home. When people can't buy a home as a young family in Texas, it's a problem. I think one of our goals when we shape policy should be that a police officer, that a teacher should be able to buy a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house that they can raise several children in. Y'all probably know this. Texas is below the replacement birth rate. This is not just a California problem. This is not just a New York problem, an East or a West Coast problem. We literally have families not having kids. The average family is having less kids than the two of them, which means that we're on a population decline. And when it comes to family formation policy, the policy that makes and incentivizes people to have families, a big portion of that is the financial path that people have to achieve things that a family would want to naturally achieve. Many people, before having kids, want to live in a home. Now, by the way, just public service announcement. If you live in an apartment and you're married and you love the person you're with, you should be having kids. That's just the reality. Part of being married is having children. It's the normative function of families in society. But I understand why some people would like to just be able to buy a 3-2 home. And so when you have a small 3-2, 1,800 square foot home that has a $6,800 property tax bill on top of the rest of your mortgage, it makes that unattainable. for somebody who's just a police officer. Your wife shouldn't have to work and you be a police officer in order to be able to buy a home in Texas. And in many of our suburban and urban areas, that's the case. And that's a problem. So property taxes has also become just an issue when it comes to holding down certain people in society and removing their primary vehicle for building a family, for generating generational wealth. It's a main issue. I do want to make sure that the property tax relief we do give is more focused on home owners, because those are the most important taxes to reduce. Some people don't like that. Some libertarians don't like that. They say, well, we should just lower all property taxes the same. Nah, not really. The property tax bill of a strip club, the property tax bill of a office building, the property tax bill for, other commercial uses, not good, not something I want to be higher, but they are of lesser priority than the family that's trying to buy a 3-2 home.
America is at a crossroads. Now, more than ever, Texas must step up and lead the country. We don't have time to mess around. The only way to save America is with a strong Texas. You and I know this, but so do the enemies of life and liberty. Therefore, you and I have no choice but to stand up and fight. I'm Sarah Gonzalez, and to the enemies of liberty, I say, come and take it.
We saw this general fiscal conservative or lack of fiscal conservative conscience in the legislature also play out in a number of bills that ended up passing, one of those being like a loan repayment program. And this is a bill that Senate Bill 646, which almost died in the Texas House, but House leadership gave Democrats one little win at the end. Senate Bill 646. This is going to be a loan repayment program for school counselors, mental health care professionals. So you get some Marxist program, and you're taught how to socially transition kids and identify if kids are being abused by their right-wing parents who actually believe that God exists and all this stuff. And then you go get a job as a school counselor where you're going to indoctrinate kids with leftist ideas, which is a major problem we have in Texas. And then the state of Texas is going to say, well, hey, if you're a school counselor and you got a degree, we'll pay off your loan. We will pay off your loan. This is a Biden-esque loan repayment program, and they expanded it this session, Senate Bill 646. The good news is the governor has yet to sign that bill. I am hopeful that he might veto the bill, which would be a win for taxpayers. But that bill passed, and it is an example I would use to show you that it doesn't seem to me that either side is strongly tightening the financial belt. And if they don't do that, we can't provide meaningful tax relief. It's a spending problem we have. We expanded a loan repayment program with Senate Bill 646 this session. At the same time, we had a bill that was going to stop taxpayer-funded lobbying, which, just to give you all perspective, like over $800 million a year is spent on taxpayer-funded lobbying. That is how much money goes from taxpayer entities to hire lobbyists to lobby vast majority of the time against your interests, against property tax reform, against ballot transparency for bonds and more taxpayer debt. These people are arguing against you having the ability to go to different education institutions and letting money follow the child and the parent, not the system. And we're putting hundreds of millions of dollars into those lobbyist pockets of our money. It is a Texas GOP priority. It passed the Senate. About an 80% ban is what I say passed the Senate, because Senator Kelly Hancock and Senator Robert Nichols led a fight to significantly gut the bill. And when I say gut the bill, that's probably a little bit aggressive. They did draw out the associations, Texas Association of County, TASB, Texas Association of School Boards, which is a leftist Marxist organization. I don't know why Senator Hancock and others would have thought that we want taxpayer money going to a far left organization like TASB, Texas Municipal League. But they did keep the ban for all of the other lobbyists that get hired outside of the association, which is probably 80% of the money that gets spent. So it wasn't quite what I would maybe constitute gutting the bill. That's a little aggressive, but it was weakened. And then the bill never even got a hearing in the House. Multiple taxpayer-funded lobbying bans put together. None of them even got a hearing in State Affairs. Ken King killed it. And I told you all this, but Ken King and Dustin Burrows both signed a pledge last year saying they both supported taxpayer-funded lobbying ban. They both believed a taxpayer-funded lobbying ban should pass. They put their signatures on it, and then it died. So again, another kind of fiscally oriented issue. One of the things that came out in the budget process is the fact that we definitely still have DEI in much of state government. We definitely still have a lot of race-based hiring, a lot of race-based contracting, where we are giving taxpayer-funded contracts to people based on the color of their skin. There are significant issues we have with not only how big the budget is, but then the kind of programs that we're funding within the budget. Anyone who tells you that there is no DEI in our budget is not being honest with you. And it is a big issue that we need to address. And the other issue that stands out to me that kind of ties a bow on these big fiscal problems is the Texas lottery. We had massive scandals at the Texas lottery. I talked about this on the show. You can go back and look at that. You can also go to Texas Scorecard. There's a documentary on the lottery. There are a ton of stories on the lottery. You can see all the problems. So we were in the best position we've ever been in to get rid of the lottery. We could get rid of it. Guys, the lottery gives us about $2 billion. So if you get rid of the lottery, you have $2 billion less dollars over the next 2 years. But bear in mind, we had a $24 billion surplus this session. So you could just take $2 billion of the surplus that you're refusing to give to property taxpayers and just plop it into the next budget, over collected taxes, and then get rid of the lottery. The lottery is a government-sanctioned monopoly that takes money from poor people, primarily, almost exclusively from a bunch of poor people who can't afford it, who are on food stamps. We're paying for these people when they do have children. Those are taxpayer-funded births, most of their health care, all sorts of subsidies going to these people, taxpayer-funded. And then we go, hey, we set up this lottery thing, so every time you get a paycheck, you can go buy a bunch of lottery tickets that you're never going to win. And then the state gets money from it. Mitch Little said it best during the House debate. Over 50 Republicans, by the way, voted to get rid of the lottery, which I have to give them credit for. I'm very appreciative of that. Cody Vasut did a great job debating that issue. Mitch Little said, it seems like our state is addicted to the lottery. You know, a lot of these people, you go, why is somebody who's making $18,000 a year buying lottery tickets? Because they're addicted. They're gambling addicts. And unfortunately, it seems like our state is addicted to the $2 billion we get from pillaging the poor people. And I don't like that. I'm very grateful that people fought. I am grateful that we reformed the lottery and took it from the Lottery Commission to the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation and put some more guardrails on it. Hopefully, we will get less revenue over the next 2 years from it with the guardrails we put on it. But this was an awesome opportunity to get an obvious win of eliminating the Texas lottery. But again, going back to that large observation that we do not right now have in the state of Texas anyone who is really looking at our budget and saying we need to rein in our spending and get some things under control. And it's so bad that even when there's this really corrupt lottery, we can't get rid of it because there's a $350 some odd billion budget and we can't find anywhere to cut. $352 billion. There was no way that our appropriators could see a $350 billion budget. That's what they had to be able to envision. They had to go from 352 to 350 and say, okay, we can do that and we won't have the lottery. And you're telling me that in the appropriations process, our appropriators couldn't sit down and just go, okay, we're going to find a couple places that we've increased and just trim them back down a little bit so that the lottery can go away. That is how addicted some people seem to be to spending your money. So the bad of the session, to me, is summed up in the absence of recognizing that we do have a bit of a spending problem. And that spending problem we have has tied our hands behind our back as a state when it comes to providing meaningful property tax relief. And that is harming everybody, but especially the middle class, who particularly are being prevented from being able to achieve an aspect of the American dream and build generational wealth, and are instead becoming perpetual renters. I don't like that. I think that's a major problem we need to fix in Texas. Now, I will say this too. Governor Abbott just recently at the Harris County Republican Party said, hey, sadly, the Texas House didn't, or not the Texas, I don't know what he said exactly. I'm paraphrasing, so I'm not trying to put words in the governor's mouth, but he said something to the effect of, sadly, the legislature fell short and didn't pass taxpayer-funded lobbying ban, but hey, it's not over yet. We still might have time for a special session. So that was really encouraging to hear Governor Abbott talking about bringing them back for a special session over an issue like taxpayer-funded lobbying. And he has also talked about property taxes in a meaningful way. He said that, he applied, I think the gist of what he said to the press was that he had applied a massive amount of political muscle on the issue of school choice to get it across the finish line. And he felt like it might be time for him to apply that same level of political muscle to the property tax problem we have in Texas, which I think would be a bit of a legacy building moment in the event that Governor Abbott takes up that mantle. So there were some good positive indicators from him on two of these issues that I've talked about. And like I said, he still hasn't signed the loan repayment program, and I'm hopeful that perhaps he lets that repayment program die with a veto, and that will happen sometime in the next several days. Guys, I hope you recognize that, yes, a lot of good happened. And if you have not watched last week's show, go back and watch it so you can see all the good that happened of the session. But today's episode is the bad. What's the bad that happened? And I hope that what I've been able to overview for you is a recognition of a bit of an issue we have regarding our budget and property tax system and other aspects of what we spend taxpayer money on and what we don't ban, like taxpayer-funded lobbying, from our taxpayer money being spent on. I think that is the bad of the session, and hopefully we can all organize to make sure that this doesn't continue. If you're wondering what you can do, I do want every single one of you to go to texastaxpayers.com. texastaxpayers.com. This is Texans for Fiscal Responsibility, which is the premier taxpayer advocate organization in the state of Texas. And they are fighting for you when it comes to all of these policies. Go there. If you do not donate to them, give them a little money. I don't care if it's $5 or $10. If you do not get their emails, subscribe to their emails. They will literally tell you this bill is potentially going to get vetoed by the governor, call the governor and ask him to veto the bill. They'll say, this bill's moving through committee, call your legislator and ask him to stop. Or help pass this conservative bill that helps fiscal conservatives. And so Texans for Fiscal Responsibility, TexasTaxpayers.com. If you go, I don't like that this is happening, I want to reshape this issue, I want to become more involved on this issue particularly, that is what you need to do. That's your call to action. And then share this episode with your friends and fellow Texans. The good was last week. The bad is this week. The ugly will be next week. And then we will continue to go on and talk about more things that are happening all across the state of Texas. May God bless you, and may God bless the great state of Texas.